Honourable member for Thunder Bay, Superior North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in May, I asked this government that they would finally consider taking real action on climate change and implement a carbon fee and dividend system. In typical Conservative fashion, I didn't get a real answer. The Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment had the gall to claim the Conservative non-approach is actually working. The Parliamentary Secretary referenced his favourite non-truth, that carbon emissions have declined thanks to Conservative, quote, action. The facts do not bear out that claim, Mr. Speaker. While emissions did drop in 2009, they had nothing to do with the Conservatives unless they wish to take credit for the global financial crisis. Since 2009, due to Conservative inaction, Canada's inaction and non-action, Canada's carbon emissions have been and are steadily rising, and our emissions will continue to rise without some kind of plan to address them. Without new measures by this government, we will not hit even the Conservatives' watered-down emission targets. According to the National Roundtable on the Environment and Economy, an important advisory group terminated by the Conservatives at the height of their anti-environment fervour in 2012, without real action, climate change will cost Canada at least $5 billion each year, just a few years from now, and up to a whopping $43 billion each year by 2050. While the Conservatives pad the pockets of their big oil friends with billion-dollar subsidies, it's Canadians who will be paying the real price. And that's not just future generations. We're seeing those costs now. So how do we get out of this mess? You would think with such an obvious problem and such glaring inaction by this government that the solution must be really complicated. But it's not, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives are ignoring a very simple solution. We just need to put a price on carbon. Canadians are smart people, Mr. Speaker, much smarter than this government, it seems. They see the growing cost of doing nothing, the billions of dollars that their children will be forced to pay, and they are ready to make an investment. Canadians are telling pollsters and politicians that they're ready to pay a little bit now to avoid paying much more down the line. But this government continues to ignore them. And the Conservatives aren't just ignoring Canadians, they're ignoring the experts also. Carbon pricing has been endorsed by scientists and economists alike. Agenda-setting finance organizations like the IMF and The Economist support a price on carbon. So does Shell Oil and BP. And why wouldn't they? Carbon pricing has been very successful in other jurisdictions. In Denmark, Finland, Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, Switzerland, even BC. Here in Canada, a price on carbon has actually coincided with economic growth in BC. Since its introduction, emissions there have declined 10%, and BC has outpaced Canada's GDP growth over the same time frame. Mr. Speaker, carbon fee and dividend is a no-brainer. It's 100% revenue neutral, and not a penny will go to government. Though the price of carbon-intensive products will rise as companies pass the cost down, every dollar will be paid in a dividend check to Canadians on an equal per capita basis. No Canadian would be taxed under carbon fee and dividend, and those who choose to turn to more environmentally friendly products or to reduce their consumption will actually make money. It can provide a guaranteed annual income to every Canadian, so the NDP should like it. Carbon fee and dividend reduces our carbon emissions and pays dividends to each and every Canadian. So why won't these Conservatives consider it? Mr. Speaker, it might even get them re-elected. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to tell the House that we have taken action, and the facts are there. It's estimated that Canada's greenhouse gas emissions in 2020 will be 128 megatons less than they would have been without action since 2005, and that's a fact. Moreover, Canada's per capita emissions are also at their lowest point since tracking began in 1990, and that's a fact. In order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, our government is implementing a sector-by-sector regulatory approach, and it's working. We have already put in place regulations for the transportation sector and the electricity generating sectors. In the transportation sector, with these regulations, Mr. Speaker, it's projected that the 2025 model year light-duty vehicles will consume up to 50% less fuel and produce about 50% less greenhouse gas emissions than 2008 vehicles, and that's a fact. Regulations for heavy-duty vehicles and engines will reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the 2018 model year heavy-duty vehicles by up to 23% compared to vehicles manufactured prior to the regulatory period. And, Mr. Speaker, that's a fact. In the electricity generation sector, Canada already has one of the cleanest systems in the world, with over three-quarters of our electricity supply emitting no greenhouse gases. By introducing a tough new regulatory performance standard for coal-fired electricity generation, Canada became the first major coal user to ban construction of traditional coal-fired electricity generation units. And, Mr. Speaker, that's a fact. Moreover, we have also announced our government's intent to regulate hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, a group of greenhouse gases which can have warming potentials up to 1,000 to 3,000 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Canada will be aligning with regulations recently proposed by the United States and taking preemptive action to reduce and limit harmful HFC emissions before they increase. And, Mr. Speaker, that's a fact. Our government's regulatory approach is further enhanced by complementary measures that will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions over the longer term. These measures include significant investments of over $10 billion in green infrastructure, energy efficiency, the development of clean energy technologies, and the production of cleaner energy fossil fuels, Mr. Speaker. That's a fact. Moving forward, the Government of Canada will continue to look for opportunities to take action in a manner that reduces greenhouse gas emissions while maintaining job creation and economic growth. And we'll do that, Mr. Speaker, without a job-killing carbon tax that the opposition seems to be obsessed with, that they'd like to implement, that would raise the price of everything from groceries to anything to do with home heating, for gasoline. This is something that Canadians don't want, Mr. Speaker. We're going to make sure that we decrease greenhouse gases while growing the economy. Thank you.
The honourable member for Thunder Bay, Superior North.
Oh, Mr. Speaker. It's true that the Conservatives are copycatting USA emission standards later and delayed, but they're not going to hit the Copenhagen target. They are going to hit their Copenhagen targets, while we're not even going to come close. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are throwing their alleged conservative principles out the window and rejecting this simple solution. Carbon fee and dividend is not a tax. It will not cost jobs. It is market-driven and it's fair. The government will give back every dollar to Canadians, and no new bureaucracy is needed, unlike the NDP's cap-and-trade scheme. It's right up the Conservative alley. The NDP, through quarterly dividend checks to every Canadian, carbon fee and dividend will reduce poverty on a national scale and will reduce our emissions at the same time, so the NDP should adopt it. It's time for the Liberals to stop waffling and pick a price on carbon. Carbon fee and dividend is the best and most moderate system, and I hope the Liberals will consider it. So for all these reasons, the Green Party is totally supportive of carbon fee and dividend. It will enable us to steadily and progressively reduce our emissions, do you get that? Without hurting our economy. It will help Canada to become a leader in green technology. And to reiterate, Mr. Speaker, it might just get them re-elected in next year's re-election campaign. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, beyond efforts to reduce emissions, our government is also taking steps to help Canadians adapt to a changing climate. Since 2006, we have invested $235 million in domestic adaptation initiatives in priority areas such as human health, communities, and the economy. These initiatives, Mr. Speaker, aim to improve our understanding of climate change and to help Canadians plan for climate impacts, notably in Canada's north. And, Mr. Speaker, my colleague did bring up the Liberals, so I just can't help myself. I'm going to comment here. The Liberals, if you remember, signed on to something called the Kyoto Accord. And what they did, Mr. Speaker, they signed on to this agreement with absolutely no plan to bring down any emissions. Under their watch, Mr. Speaker, we saw greenhouse gases go up almost 130 megatons. Mr. Speaker, our approach is working. We're seeing for the first time ever a decoupling of economic growth and greenhouse gases. This is historic. This is something that everybody in this House should be on board with. The greenhouse gases have decreased since 2006, 5.1%. We've seen our economy grow 10.6%. Mr. Speaker, this is working. This is something we all can be proud of, and I hope that everyone in this House really focuses on doing the best we can so that the economy continues to grow while greenhouse gases are decreasing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.